Cartethyia and Fleur-de-Lis will purge all evil, and in this video I'm going to tell you how to build and play this dynamic duo best, starting with how Cartethyia and Fleur-de-Lis actually work. At base, you will be playing as Cartethyia, who has her own normal attacks, skill, and heavy attack, etc., and Fleur-de-Lis will be available for your Resonance Liberation, who also has her own basic attacks, heavy attack, and skill. So now let's get into them specifically, starting with Cartethyia. Cartethia's basic attacks are up to 4 strikes, and the 4th strike will be capable of inflicting a stack of area erosion and summoning the Divine Sword, which will be used later. Cartethia's heavy attack will summon the Discord Sword, and it can be performed in mid-air. This will also count as basic attack damage. Cartethia's plunging attack will absorb all the nearby sword shadows, which will be relevant for her Resonance Liberation. Depending on how many sword shadows were absorbed, up to a maximum of 3, Cartethia's plunging attack damage will increase. This attack is also considered to be area erosion damage. Then moving on to Cartethia's skill, it will do arrow damage and inflict 2 stacks of area erosion upon the enemy. Her skill counts as basic attack damage. It can also be used in mid-air. Additionally, this is where you summon the Virtue Sword. So to recap, you get the Divinity Sword from your 4th basic attack, Discord from your heavy attack, and finally you get the Virtue Sword from your skill. And all of this will become relevant within the Resonance Liberation, which is where Cartethyia turns into Fleur-de-Lis, who is, in my opinion, the better character. Don't at me on that. The first thing that will happen is Cartethyia drains 50% of her maximum HP to turn into Fleur-de-Lis, and she will also gain Manifest for 12 seconds. While in Manifest, Fleur-de-Lis will gain buffs depending on which swords were previously absorbed by your plunging attack. When you have the Sword of Divinity, Fleur-de-Lis will amplify the arrow erosion damage that nearby enemies take by 50%, as well as cutting the trigger interval in half, essentially giving you 50% more damage per tick and twice as many ticks of area erosion, which is a very large increase towards its overall damage output. Whenever you have the Discord Sword, Fleur-de-Lis will spread the highest number of erosion stacks to all nearby enemies whenever she uses her 5th basic attack, 2nd aerial attack, enhanced heavy attack, or her 2nd stage of her skill. And whenever you have the Sword of Virtue, Fleur-de-Lis' 4th basic attack will be able to slow enemies down, and she will gain additional resistance to interruption. That was a lot of words, but to simplify it, when you have all of these swords that you farmed as Cartethyia and absorbed with her plunging attack, Fleur-de-Lis will give a bunch of buffs towards arrow erosion. Additionally, when you haven't absorbed any of the swords, Fleur-de-Lis' 5th basic attack, 2nd aerial attack, and 2nd stage of her skill will immediately force 1 proc of area erosion, as well as taking the stack counter down by 1. Fleur-de-Lis also has her own Forte bar, which goes up to 120, and can be obtained by doing various things like using your basic attacks, aerial attacks, and your skill. Basically every attack will give you Forte, and when your Forte is at max, Fleur-de-Lis will be able to cast her Resonance Liberation to do a massive nuke of arrow damage. She will amplify this nuke by 20% based on the amount of area erosion stacks that are on the enemy, up to a maximum of 5. This will also drain all of the area erosion off of the enemy. That was a lot of words, so to simplify yet again, absorb all of the swords with Cartethyia, then transform into Fleur-de-Lis, use attacks until your Forte is full, and then do your nuke. Got it? Awesome. Now it's time to get into the intro skill. Both Fleur-de-Lis and Cartethyia have their own intro skill. Cartethia's will do arrow damage and apply 2 stacks of area erosion, as well as summoning the Sword of Discord, meaning you no longer have to use your heavy attack. After your intro skill, Cartethyia will be able to immediately start on her 2nd basic attack, meaning she can skip the 1st basic attack as well. Fleur-de-Lis' intro skill is a lot simpler. It's simply just going to do arrow damage and give her Forte. You can also immediately start on her 2nd basic attack after using this intro skill. However, you should never be using Fleur-de-Lis' intro skill and will only be using Cartethia's. Cartethia's outro skill will make it so characters other than Cartethyia and Fleur-de-Lis will have their arrow damage increased by 17.5% to enemies that have a negative status on them, so that's very nice. Then when we get to the Forte Circuit, this is where all of Fleur-de-Lis's attacks are stored. She has 5 normal attacks, 3 aerial attacks, the third of which can be instantly accessed by simply holding the aerial attack button instead of pressing it, and after doing the third aerial, if you continue attacking, you start on the third basic attack. You also have a heavy attack on Fleur-de-Lis, and if you keep using normal attacks after casting the heavy attack, you get an enhanced heavy attack. Jumping will also make Fleur-de-Lis do an attack. After doing a dodge counter, Fleur-de-Lis can instantly start on her 4th basic attack. Then there is her skill, which has 2 stages, one of which will group enemies, and the second of which will also group enemies, and if you immediately start normal attacking after using it, you'll be able to start on Fleur-de-Lis's 3rd normal attack. That is a lot of words, but don't worry, I'm going to be going into the rotation separately. Now it's time to talk about the inherent skills. The first of which will give your team 20% healing bonus, as well as giving them resistance to interruption. And if specifically Arrow Rover is in your team, the Arrow Rover will gain 25 Forte, which will make their rotation a little bit shorter. Cartethia's second inherent skill will give her 30% arrow damage when attacking enemies that have arrow erosion on them. And for every stack of arrow erosion above 3, she'll gain an additional 10%, up to a maximum of 60% combined. Meaning, essentially, if you have 6 stacks of arrow erosion on the enemy, you'll get 60% damage bonus. Okay, that was a lot of words. So first I'm going to talk about her rotation, and then I'm going to talk about her talent priority, because it's going to be a nightmare to keep up with all of the words in Cartethia's kit. It's genuinely insane. You start with her intro skill, followed by her 2nd, 3rd, and 4th basic. Then you use her resonance skill and her plunging attack. Then you use her Resonance Liberation and her 1st skill. Then you hold her basic attack to use her 3rd aerial. Then you immediately use her 2nd stage of skill, followed by her 3rd, 4th, and 5th basic, and then your heavy and your enhanced heavy. Then you finally use your Liberation finisher, and that's the ending of the rotation. For her skill priority, you want to focus on leveling up her Forte Circuit and her Resonance Liberation. These are going to be the largest contributors towards Cartethia's damage output. After that, you want to focus on leveling up the basic attacks. And then finally, you want to level up the skill. Definitely give a hard focus on the Forte Circuit as well as the Liberation. The basics and skill are less important, especially the skill, but I'd still level them because they're both capable of doing a pretty good amount of damage. The intro skill, however, I wouldn't really care about it. Its damage is not high enough to me to be worth the resources, but if it is to you, all good for you. Now with that absolute mess of words out of the way, it's time to talk about a bit more of a shorter section, being Cartethia's weapon options. Her best in slot is going to be the Defier's Thorn, giving you a massive amount of HP, because yes, that's what Cartethia scales off of. Additionally, when you attack enemies with air erosion, Cartethia's damage will be amplified by 20%. And after using an intro skill or a basic attack, Cartethyia will be able to ignore 8% of the enemy's defense. This is going to be Cartethia's best in slot by quite a large margin. Don't ignore just how large this damage increase is. It's comparable to characters like Brant, for God's sake. So if you have any funds left over, please go for this signature. If you don't want to, you can go for Red Spring. It has a lot of base attack, which is wasted on Cartethyia, but it also gives crit rate and basic attack damage bonus, both of which Cartethyia can profit off of pretty well. This is going to be her second best in slot. There's also the R1 Emerald of Genesis. Much like Red Spring, it has a high base attack as well as giving crit rate, but the unique advantage that Emerald of Genesis has is it gives 12.8% energy regen, which should entirely cover your energy regen needs, meaning you don't have to get any rolls for it, which is technically a damage increase. You can also go for Blazing Brilliance. Yet again, it has a high base attack which is entirely wasted, but at least it gives crit. The skill damage is less useful than the energy regen and the basic attack damage from the previous two 5-star weapons, but it's still going to be pretty close to these two. And then finally, if you have none of these options, prepare to use a 3-star. Go for the R5 Guardian Sword, it has HP. There really is no other options considering all the 4-star swords are either energy regen or attack. There is no good option here for Cartethyia, sadly. So as you can see, getting Cartethia's signature will be a massive increase for her damage output, and I absolutely recommend getting it over any sequence, to be honest. While her sequences are incredibly powerful, you're just going to be stuck with way too bad options if you do not get this signature. So honestly, it's a recommender for anyone who got Cartethyia. So now that your Cartethyia has the right weapon, it's time to look into her echo sets. The best Sonata set is going to be the 5-piece Windward Pilgrimage. It will give you a flat 10% arrow damage on the 2-piece, as well as giving an additional 30% on the 5-piece when attacking enemies with arrow erosion. It also gives an additional 10% crit rate. This is simply set power creep, giving the same amount of damage bonus as both Sierra Gale and Gusts of Welkin, but also having an additional 10% crit rate, so it is going to be a very good set to farm. Your primary echo on this set will be Reminiscence Fleur-de-Lis. Your second best bet, if you're using Shikona on your team, will be the 5-piece Sierra Gale with Nightmare Phalian Berengal. It, much like Windward Pilgrimage, gives 40% arrow damage bonus, but it sadly does not have access to Reminiscence Fleur-de-Lis or the 10% crit rate, so it will be a good amount worse than using Windward Pilgrimage, but it is still your second best bet. However, using Gusts of Welkin will be better than Sierra Gale, assuming you don't have Shikona in your team, because otherwise Shikona would be running Gusts of Welkin. It also gives 40% arrow damage to Cartethyia herself, but additionally gives you access to running Reminiscence Fleur-de-Lis. So I would definitely say that if you are not using Shikona, using Gusts of Welkin on your Cartethyia is completely fine. And then if you don't have any of these sets, you can just go for a 2-piece arrow damage combination between Windward Pilgrimage, Gusts of Welkin, or Sierra Gale. Now as for the stats you'll be running on your Cartethyia, this is going to be the first character that actually prefers a 4-4-1-1-1 build. Hallelujah! So we are going to be running a 4-4-1-1-1 build, using crit rate and crit damage assuming signature on Cartethyia, with you being able to either go crit rate or crit damage if you're using one of the crit stick weapons. Your 1 costs are always going to be HP percent, there's no reason to deviate from this. Try to get around 47,500 HP for your Cartethyia, as well as getting around 75% crit rate, maybe a little lower, to about 275% crit damage. So now that your Cartethyia is fully built, it's time to get in some teammates. Cartethia's best in slot team is going to be with Shikona and the Arrow Rover. Shikona will be capable of applying a lot of area erosion, which Cartethyia really appreciates because she actually buffs area erosion damage quite a lot when she is in the Fleur-de-Lis form. Her plunge attack also does quite a lot of damage, which means she's capable of benefiting from the 100% damage amplification that Shikona gives on a very strong attack. But that's the only thing she does that counts as erosion. Shikona will be especially useful in multi-wave, because Cartethyia's application only counts in Cartethyia mode and not in Fleur-de-Lis mode. Shikona is your only way of getting area erosion application for multi-wave. But because in most multi-wave scenarios you're going to be hovering around the 1 or 2 stack mark, it's not super useful. Shikona also has a bunch of built-in buffs in her kit, mainly being the 24% arrow damage bonus thanks to her solo ensemble, as well as the 10% arrow damage shred with her signature weapon. Sadly, Static Mist will not be able to help you out here, because Cartethyia is not attack scaling. Shikona will be a massive upgrade for your Cartethyia if you have her. If it's between giving Shikona to your Phoebe or your Cartethyia, definitely give her to Cartethyia, it's worth it. As for Arrow Rover, as you probably would have guessed in the kit explanation section, Cartethyia has a bunch of buffs that specifically need Rover to be activated. Primarily the damage amplification on her finishing attack from her Liberation, her second inherent skill, as well as her giving buffs to Arrow Rover specifically thanks to her first inherent skill. And because she really cares about the damage that arrow erosion itself deals, Arrow Rover is an additionally big help. Outside of increasing the erosion cap, Arrow Rover doesn't really do much. I guess they do give 10% arrow damage amplification, but it's not really going to be super massive. You're mainly using Rover here for the stack increase. If you do not have Shikona, your entire team is going to be changing. Because Fleur-de-Lis will drain the amount of arrow erosion that's on the enemy over time, you will sadly not be able to have enough uptime on arrow erosion in order to make running Arrow Rover worth it. Cartethyia doesn't even apply that much arrow erosion on her own, so Arrow Rover loses basically all of their value. turning your best team into, guess what? Thundah Shorekeeper. Yep, a lot of Cartethyia's damage counts as basic attack damage, making Thundah the best buffer for this team. And then you're gonna be running Shorekeeper because, as I said previously, Arrow Rover does not have much utility in this team now that we take away most of the Arrow Erosion application. Because Cartethyia is HP scaling, the attack buffing that Verena and Baija have aren't really going to be that useful, leaving Shorekeeper as your best healing option. If you don't have Thundah available, you can also turn towards Alto for his 23% arrow damage amplification. It will be worse than Thundah, but not by that much. And now, finally, it's time to talk about Cartethia's sequences. The first sequence will make it so whenever Cartethyia or Fleur-de-Lis defeat an enemy that has air erosion on them, they'll be able to make the air erosion stacks carry over towards the next enemy, meaning that the need for Shakona in multi-wave is lower. But Shakona will still be your best in slot teammate, so you really just can't get rid of her. Fleur-de-Lis will also gain a 25% crit damage buff for every 30 Forte you get, and because the maximum Forte is 120, this stacks up to 4 times, giving you 100% crit damage on your Liberation finisher. An excellent first sequence. Then it's time for the second sequence. Whenever Cartethyia uses her Resonance Liberation, the cap of arrow erosion on the enemy she hits will be increased by 3 stacks. The next attack will also automatically apply 3 stacks of arrow erosion immediately. It will also immediately make this arrow erosion proc, and it will not remove any stacks. Additionally, the damage multipliers on Cartethia's intro, basic, heavy, and dodge counter will be increased by 50%. And the multiplier of her aerial attack will be increased by 200%. And for every Sword Shadow that Cartethyia absorbs, her skill's cooldown will be reduced by 1 second, but this final effect isn't that useful. This second sequence makes Arrow Rover's job entirely unneeded. Thank the lords, because Arrow Rover sucks to use. Because Arrow Rover will now no longer be your only way to get 6 stacks of arrow erosion, a bunch of the Arrow Rover specific buffs are now completely accessible without Arrow Rover, meaning you now want to pivot towards Shorekeeper to get those crit buffs. And also, let's be honest here, you want to eliminate Arrow Rover from your team. I do not know a single person that actually enjoys using the Arrow Rover. So overall, yet again, an incredible sequence. For the third sequence, Fleur-de-Lis' 5th basic attack, 2nd aerial attack, enhanced heavy attack, and resonance skill 2nd stage will apply 2 stacks of area erosion to the enemy. It will also double the damage of the Resonance Liberation's finisher. Yet again, an incredible sequence. This allows Fleur-de-Lis to keep up the maximum amount of air erosion stacks even without Shakona, which is incredibly useful. But even here, Shakona will still be the best in slot teammate, so do not get it twisted. You also get a massive damage increase in the form of doubling the finisher's damage. The finisher's damage is already really strong, so imagine that times 2. For the fourth sequence, whenever any teammate applies any sort of negative status, everyone's damage bonus will be increased by 20%. This is obviously the worst sequence we've seen yet, but what are we expecting from an S4 here? Still, it's pretty decent. S5 is a purely defensive sequence. Whenever Cartethyia or Fleur-de-Lis are knocked down, they will not actually die, and instead they will gain a shield that is about 20% of Cartethia's max HP. Additionally, whenever you use your Resonance Liberation, it will only drain 25% of Cartethia's max HP instead of 50%. This is purely defensive, so as usual, I'm going to say, don't get this. Just don't. And now finally for the S6. Casting your Resonance Liberation will increase the amount of area erosion stacks on enemies to the maximum amount, and the Liberation finisher will no longer drain any area erosion. When casting any intro skill, or either of your Resonance Liberations, you will gain an additional ability for 30 seconds, which gives you an extra tick of area erosion damage at the maximum amount of stacks whenever anyone applies area erosion at max stacks. Additionally, enemies will also take 40% more damage from Fleur-de-Lis. Yet again, this is an incredible sequence, but what are we expecting here for a sequence 6? This entirely removes the need for any teammates, considering the fact that Fleur-de-Lis will now be capable to access all of her buffs even when you don't even have any other teammates in your team. So this is an incredibly good S6 when it comes to overworld and convenience. It will also add a lot of damage to your rotation if you're using Shikona, because Shikona is capable of applying error erosion approximately once every 1.6 seconds. This now translates into an extra erosion proc, which, considering all of the buffs that erosion is getting, is incredibly powerful. So overall, this is the best lineup of sequences we've seen in the entire game to this day. Cartethyia is definitely a new ceiling for the game's damage output, and if you have all of her teammates, there should not be a single character that's realistically competing with her in the Tower of Adversity. She really did set the bar to another high, and to be honest, I think it's a bit too high, but what else did we expect from a Sentinel Resonator? Let me know if you learned anything new from this video in the comments below, and while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description below. I'm pretty active in there, so there's a pretty good chance I'll answer any question you have. Additionally, if you just want to see more of me as a person, check out my second channel, which is linked in the description and in the pinned comment. On that channel, I'm basically going to be talking about whatever I like to talk about, but primarily things like story writing, as well as punishing Grey Raven. But that'll be all from me. Peace.